This session is from ASF's 2024 conference at RMIT Melbourne with Graham Hood, Matt Wong and Gigi Foster.
This morning, as you know, we are pivoting away from particular sort of disciplinary themes and towards the theme of regenerating communities. That's what we are calling this session. And I hope this will be a very... I have two people on the panel with me who I have great respect for, who have been operating in different arenas to understand and try to bring together communities in Australia in our efforts to rebuild the country on sort of the wisdom of those communities. And so I'm going to read out bios I have here. I'm sure each of you probably in the room has heard of at least one, if not both, of these lovely gentlemen. But just in case you haven't. First, we have Graham Hood, who has been was a career aviator for 53 years and a captain for Qantas for over 32 years. When Qantas decided to mandate for all its staff, Graham had some grave concerns and could not abide an airline with such an impeccable safety record taking such a huge gamble, given the experimental nature of the vaccine. I'm in that generation that remembers Rain Man, and when somebody, I think Tom Cruise asked Dustin Hoffman, who was playing Rain Man, do you want to take to go from, I don't know what it was, San Francisco to Los Angeles or something?
Qantas. I got to go Qantas. Qantas. Safest airline in the world, Qantas.
Never lost a passenger. That's it. Such were his concerns that on the 7th of September 2020, very, very distinctly, he made a video expressing his concerns in the hope that it would shake some sense into the management. And I remember you looked right at the camera and you were singing and you were putting on your tie and your, the last accoutrements of your uniform for what you thought was the last time. And I think it was the last time. Yeah. It was incredibly moving. Within 9 hours, he traveled around the globe, and his life changed in the most profound ways. Since then, having resigned his position in protest, he's become a substantial force for the voiceless. Touring the country for 18 months with his wife, Michelle, Graham has spoken to over 300 communities in 7 states in an effort to reunite community and reestablish our fast-fading spirit of Australia. He learned the necessity of restoring manhood in a sustainable and healthy way and has seen men answer their call in their thousands. So that's also very much parallel with, as you know, ASF's efforts this year to partner with Mothers of Sons to run the Restoring the Presumption of Innocence conference, which highlighted as well the anti-male trends in some of our legal culture in Australia. So that's Graham Hood. Oof, can't compete with that. Who is known to many people as Hoodie, and of course runs an incredible podcast called Club Grubbery, which apparently used to be called Club ScoMo, and I didn't know that until just this morning.
Yeah, well, when ScoMo disappeared, we had to change. Couldn't get anything to work with Albo. And we never thought that Club Grubbery would go for any length of time. We thought it would only last for a few weeks. Yeah. And we're stuck with the name now. We don't much like it. And a lot of Americans don't like it. So when you get a high-profile Yank to come on, they say, well, what's Club Grubbery? What doesn't sound very wholesome, So we've really had to argue the point to get some really top-class people on the program. But anyhow, it is what it is, and we just roll with it.
You can always fall back on the Australian thing, right? Witchetty grubs. And so you're just sort of saying, you're trying to say in connection with the bush communities or something like this.
Well, John Larder used to say, they're grubs, they're all grubs.
Right.
And so it came from that.
Okay.
And it's a takeoff from Roy and HG, who did a show called Club Buggery on the ABC, right?
Okay.
And we couldn't go down that theme because
that's,
that doesn't, anyway.
Yeah.
So it's all just
interesting.
Had we known that it was going to be as popular as it is, we would have had a different name for it.
Right.
But maybe then it wouldn't be as popular.
You never know. You never know. Okay, well, there we are. That's Graham Hood. Our second panelist is Matt Wong. Matt Wong built a media studio that trades in the most valuable commodity of all, trust. Of course, broken during this last few years particularly. Their long-form interviews have featured internationally and in mainstream media for their unique ability to break news in a deep and honest way, with both institutional trust and viewer attention spans at an all-time low. Discernible, which is the name of Discernible Media Studios or Discernible Podcasts, specializes in creating ultra-consumable content without diluting the message or relying on clickbait tactics employed by legacy media, which to me says, Matt, that you're not lazy. Because, I mean, that's a hard thing to do, right?
I'm pretty lazy.
But I mean, how do you think it's ultra consumable?
I didn't write that.
Aha. Okay.
No. The idea being, and I'll speak more to this when we're talking about communities. I think some of the techniques that mainstream legacy media use, not mainstream anymore, I guess, clickbait. I think we can use that to our advantage. Much like I'm a big rules for radicals who have informed the woke left since the 70s. So anyway, I think we need to catch people's attention spans.
Yes.
And how many people are going to watch 4 hours of you and me talking? Much more people watch the 60-second clip that I put out of you and me talking.
Yep. Fair enough. So there is a show that's mentioned in this bio that you didn't write, but I'm going to read it out anyway because it seems relevant. It says their panel news show, The People's Project, achieves consistent ratings to an underserved and highly engaged viewer segment by taking a straightforward but well-informed approach to the news. Standalone news editorials expose the truth and more often humor of significant events happening. So the People's Project sounds that's a perfect name for the kind of thing that I want to talk about here this morning. Discernible also produces white-labeled content for companies. Now, I'm not actually sure what white-labeled means. Maybe you can explain that to us.
Often you'll see you buy a pizza from Coles, or it's white-labeled. Somebody's creating pizzas under their own brand, but in the other half of their factory, they're also creating 50,000 pizzas a year for Coles, but not putting their name on it. Coles is putting their name on it. Yeah, we do that for others. So our work is everywhere, but you don't see it.
So white-labeled means that, you don't put the discernible name on it, but you work on doing the content generation for companies, charities, and government agencies throughout Australia. So you work for the enemy, is what you're saying.
We have, Victoria Police on down,
Very good. Wrapping up their messages in the broadcast quality video production, discernible audiences already enjoy, blah, blah, blah. And I like this final sentence very much. Discernible guests, panelists, and segment hosts in their beliefs, worldviews, and allegiances. But one thing we all agree on is that we're all on Team Human. I actually borrowed that from you yesterday, or 2 days ago, I have to say, Matt. I was talking to an audience of 300 high school students, and having a conversation with the host after my keynote talk, and he was saying something like, well, how did you during the COVID time and say the things that were very unpopular? And I said, well, and you were called a granny killer and all this. And I said, well, yeah, I was called a granny killer, but, I'm obviously not a granny killer. And to me, that just said more about him. And I said, we're all on Team Human, right? And it's something that is basically nobody can argue against. If you can with an objective, with a goal, even if you think differently about the world, even if you have different ideas about how to get to that goal, the unification on the goal, it relaxes people. It makes people feel like, okay, we can actually talk to you, yeah?
It's the whole misanthropic moment we have in our society, I think, is a cancer. Cancer. Here's an interesting, people say cows are destroying the planet by eating grass. I'm a farmer now. Cows are destroying the planet by eating grass and emitting carbon dioxide. Cows eating grass are the planet.
That's it. That's true. Yes, exactly. And people are also the planet, right?
Exactly.
Like what? And the idea that we would have more life because of more, higher temperatures, and therefore we can green Siberia. That sounds like, positive for the environment in a sense to me. But let's not go into climate change just yet. Okay, so I wanted to just start out by getting each of you to talk to whatever point you want to in the general. How do we, as a kind of collective who's interested in rebuilding a positive and happy, joyful, healthy Australia, how do we ensure that our efforts are tethered to the needs and the feelings, the beliefs, the sort of perspective of the Australian supposedly building all this for? How do we stay in touch with that community, and how do you engage with them on all of the various important issues that we're trying to work on? And I'll maybe let you go first, Graham.
Okay, well, I'll probably talk for a few minutes here, and before I start, delineation about what is the foundation of the things that I say. I prayed yesterday. I want to make it very, very clear that any terminology I use around God has nothing whatsoever to do with religion. I think religion is the business of God conducted by men, and they suck at it, to be honest. Religion is responsible for changing the image of a loving Father in heaven to a punishing dictator, and I think it will answer for that one day. So my faith, which drives everything that I do, is based on the fact that my life had degenerated until I was age 53 to the point of myself as a non-believer. I had no purpose. And at the 11th hour, a chain of miracles happened that turned me from virtually going over the cliff into living a life that's now exploding with relevance. So I see myself degenerating to the point where I was almost existent, and then Christ happened to come into my life, and my life has been regenerating from there. So I've hit the pit, the bottom of the pit, and I'm climbing out through my faith. So I don't want anyone to think that when I pray or anything that I'm trying to bring religion into any of this. We in something, because we have lost faith in virtually everything that we used to rely on: law enforcement, judiciary, government, banks, charity, media, health, education. We talked about all that yesterday. We've lost faith in all of that. And in the corporate church. A lot of people relied on the corporate church during the lockdowns, and the corporate church marched in lockstep with the government, and it failed. And to its peril, it's failed. And it needs to be held to account. And a large part of what I do is holding corporate churches to account. I was pleased the other day to see the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Apart from the sexual abuse cover-up that he was participating in the church, he was also attributed to saying that if Jesus was alive today, he'd be vaccinated. So to me, that's just heresy, hypocrisy, the whole thing. Just I want to make that clear and distinct to this audience today. I also want to say that when I got to that point where I was going to take my own life and I had no relevance in anything, I didn't believe in anything, and that turned around, I realised from that point that our whole life is about serving others. It's meant to be about other-centred love. That's what it's all about, and that's what the Bible is about. And there's 1 John 4:8 in the Bible says, "For he who does not know love does not know God, for God is love." But religion has distorted all that. So when I realised that someone I'd never met died 2,000 years ago on a cross to give a filthy porn addict like me a second chance, that's when I realised that there was another purpose to my life. And so my whole life has been geared around that. I have no money, but that doesn't worry me in the least. I don't know where the next dollar's coming from. I don't know how you really, really hard. But John and I decided when we started Club Grubbery, what was our purpose to keep it going? Are we going to keep committing this energy to it? And the reason that we keep it going is not for money. We dumped the whole sponsorship thing because people were saying you're only in it for the money, and that was distorting our message and all this sort of stuff. And we decided that our sole purpose was to be there to give a voice to the voiceless. And so that's what we continue to do. Our last program was on the pelvic mesh scandal and those voiceless victims who are getting nothing, even though they won one of the biggest judgments in Australia. Nothing out of it, nothing at all. So we just want to continue to be a voice for the voiceless. And for me, I put my faith in God. He owns all the cattle on 1,000 hills, and my bills just seem to get paid because there are people who say, I love what you're doing, I want to support you, and it just happens. And we don't go chasing it. It's not worth chasing it. We just roll with the flow. So what happened when I came out of that point where my life was irrelevant and I started to climb out, I realised that the best things in life aren't things, they're relationships, it's people. And we can go on for hours and hours unscripted talking about how we got. But at the moment, we've got to look at what we can do to get out of it. We all understand the reasons. It's no use to rehash it. So when I realised that I was saved for a purpose back then, what was that purpose? Well, one of the catalysts that got me out of the pit was meeting my wife, Michelle, on my last before I was going to kill myself. I set a date to kill myself. And on my last flight, it was a flight from Brisbane to Perth, overnight in Perth, fly back the next day. I went to the bathroom, and while I was waiting to go to the bathroom in the forward galley behind in front of the cockpit door there, the door opened. The most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life. Absolutely stunning. And I thought, whoa. And she smiled, and I smiled at her, and I went into the bathroom, and when I came back out, she was still there because she couldn't go back to her seat because there was a cart in the aisle and she couldn't get back down the aisle. And I couldn't go into the cockpit because you guard the cockpit door for security reasons when you went back in. So there I was, stuck in this confined space with the most beautiful woman I'd ever met. And we had a 10-minute conversation that changed both of our lives. And within 6 weeks, we were living together on the Gold Coast. And as soon as my divorce came through, we got married. And we've come together. Horrendous childhood sexual abuse. She's got a very high IQ. She's got 3 degrees in law, nursing and psychology. And her whole life was about serving others. And I felt I had a purpose to serve others. And I realised that the greatest gift we can give to people is just love. Correct, wrote the song, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. And that's the absolute truth of it. Truth, love and truth go hand in hand, because love and truth are bed partners. That's how it should be. So when we got together, and her life was a mess too, and we sort of to help each other out, we wondered why was this destiny altered in the way that it was. I used the term divine intervention, and then I said to her, what is divine intervention? She said, well, that's a higher power that's done something. And I said, well, I believe a higher power's brought us together. And what was the purpose? And we realised that we were brought to help broken people. She wanted to help people who were surviving childhood sexual abuse and help to restore their broken lives. And I wanted to work with men who were dying from pornography addiction and other addictions. And we started to form a real purpose. We ended up getting involved in a church because she said she wanted to be baptised into her church. And I said, well, I'm not into religion, but I'll go with you every Saturday. She's Seventh-day Adventist, and I am now too. And within 6 weeks, we both put our hands up to be baptised, and we were baptised and married on the same day a year or so later. And so what was our purpose? Why did we come together? To restore broken lives. We could see it clearly. We're a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. And God uses the combined experiences of our failures to give us wisdom to be used for service of other people. That's how it's all designed to be. So we formed a organization back then called Mission Serenity. Our mission was to have serenity in our lives and to bring others to a life of serenity in theirs. And as a result, we ended up realising the need for a holistic healing approach. So we got involved in a program called Celebrate Recovery, which was run by Warren in the USA. It's a Christ-centred 12-step recovery movement. And eventually we developed our own Christ-centred 12-step recovery movement called Recovery Road. Michelle wrote the books for that. They were published. We've just had the 2nd edition republished. And we have been planting this recovery group for anyone with any hurt, habit or hang-up all around the country. It was even in the penal system in Florida, in the Jacksonville Penitentiary, which I believe is the biggest penitentiary in America, which by the land of the free and the home of the brave, they have the most people in prison in any world in the USA. And so our books found their way into the head chaplain of Department of Corrections in Florida, and they ran all their inmates through this program. We gave them the program. They wanted the books. How do we buy the books? We said, we'll send you the print masters. You print them up, but they don't belong to us. It belongs to God. Use it. And so we've planted that little ministry all around the place, and it just ticks away quietly, and a whole lot of people are being healed. And then COVID happened, and we realised that we had to divert our shift to what was going on in COVID, because the one thing that happened after I made that video, which had, I think, 7 million views in 9 hours, I think it was my singing, you know. People
it was
wanted
awesome.
to,
it was awesome.
It could have gone anyway. All of a sudden, I realised that I was blown out into no man's land between 2 warring trenches, and I had no idea. All I wanted Alan Joyce to do was look at it and say, you know what, he might be right. Maybe we shouldn't do this. I mean, how naive was I? I had no idea how social media worked. I sent the video to a friend of mine. I used a Qantas iPad to film it on, the company iPad. And when I sent it back, which I did, but I left that particular video on there in the hope that one day a guy would be flying along with my old iPad and say, there's a need for a hierarchy in a family and a community based on wisdom. So, in the old village-type environment, the elders were always looked up to because they managed to live long and they must have learned something along the way. On for this positive parenting thing, which I tried to mention yesterday, we've seen the authority gradients shift in the house from, patriarch, matriarch down through the children to the other way around, where now the kids are dictating what's going on. So as a result of striving to meet every want, not need of the children, spouses are put on the back burner, and that's when the rot sets in. That's when somebody else comes in and meets their emotional need, and before you know it, you've got single-parent families everywhere. It was never designed to be that way. If we love our children, we have to put our spouse before our children. I really believe that, and they thrive in an environment holding hands. Mum and dad, cuddle on the couch. Mum and dad go out for a date once a month or whatever. Kids thrive in that because they hate to see the dysfunction in the kids at school who don't have that. And so they'll be happy. I said to a guy I flew with one day, first time I'd ever flew with him, we're sitting up in the cruise. I said, so tell me, Paul, what do you do for fun? He said, fun? I don't have fun. I've got kids. I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, mate, he said, my whole life is about, when I'm not flying, I've got to keep flying overtime to earn the money to pay for all their devices, excursions to Italy and all this sort of stuff. And then when I'm home, I'm taking them to soccer and to ballet training and swimming lessons, da-da-da. He said, I don't have time for anything. I said, why do you do that? He said, they expect me to. I said, who does? He said, they do. I said, who's they? He said, well, that's what we're expected to do. I said, have you asked your children what they expect from you? He said, no. I said, let me give you an example. If you had a box in this hand that had 2 BMWs in the driveway, a fancy 50-square house with a swimming pool, holidays in Hollywood, in America or wherever, that you go to the best private dads in your life 37 seconds a day, because the stats are that the average Australian father spends 37 seconds a day in one-on-one communication with each of his children. That's frightening. By the time your child is 6 years old, the TV will have spoken more to that child than you will in their entire lifetime. So, and in that box. And in the other box, you say, here we are in an average house. The kids go to a good public school. We go to Port Macquarie for our holidays. And dad's in their life 4 or 5 hours a day. Which box do you reckon the kids would take? And he said, the second one. I said, one if you're a kid? He said, yeah. I said, so why is the only option they have this thing that you're offering them? Because they don't like it. But I said, you need to ask them that question before they get to puberty. Because after puberty, they're going to say, no, I'll take that first box, because having you in my life 37 seconds a day is you for 4 hours would be a disaster, because you're a grouchy old bastard and I don't want to have anything to do with you. And when we give our kids what they need, we give them unconditional love by meeting their emotional needs. Understand that The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman is an amazing book. We teach from it in our marriage groups at home. Our kids what they need, they will forever grow and develop their character. But our problem today is that we're now seeing adults who've grown up through that positive parenting thing where they got an award for even making mistakes. And now when the pressure's applied, when a boss says, no, you did that wrong, they spit the dummy. They take the boss to court for wrongful dismissal. They spit the dummy when they don't get their own way politically. And we have created a society that is perpetually, offended. Perpetually offended. Rich tapestry, and it has a lot of dark threads through it. And the dark threads are the mistakes and the things that we did wrong in our past that we regret. And if we went behind that tapestry on the wall and pulled those dark threads out and went back and looked at it, it would collapse and it wouldn't look as good. We are the sum of the mistakes that we've made along the way. And when we overprotect our kids, we deprive them of what they need most of all, and that's life experience.
So I think in an alternative life, you were a preacher, Graham. You are an amazing proselytizer for love and understanding, and I'm very inspired. You picked up on many themes that I want to come back to, but I want to give us a different perspective on community from a very different sort of profession, in a sense, and a very different orientation, I think, where you've connected with people maybe in a more, I suppose, I don't know, I want to say fancy or, not as kind of a grassroots sort of way through this media. And you've done it in an incredibly professional way. People look at those podcasts and it's like so slick. It's amazing. And I think you're doing it, though, for very similar kinds of motivations. So tell us about community connection and engagement from your perspective.
I think a Qantas captain's pretty fancy. I wouldn't say. But thank you for the honour for being here. Before I got micro famous, there were a few heroes that we saw on TV, my wife and I sitting around. One of them was this strange woman up in Sydney getting on the parliamentary estimates, taking people to account. The first person we saw saying, team sanity. When people say community, I always find it a bit naff. Oh yeah, let's go and have a picnic in the park. And I did organise those things during COVID. But they say, we need community. What does that even mean? And so being the nerd that I am, I started to think of it in terms of network theory. People familiar with network theory, nodes, paths between nodes. This idea that we all exist with connections to other people. Sometimes those connections are long, those paths are long, sometimes they're short. Sometimes we have a lot of connections, sometimes we have few. But then along comes COVID, and I think we've been caught with our pants down because free-floating nodes, people existing with very tenuous connections. What happened? Everyone suddenly got smashed, their networks got smashed by the government, and suddenly we were all, when I say we, I mean society at large. Everyone in this room is not society at large. You're that of team sanity. Most people are not like you. Remember that. What happened to them? They all implemented these new paths to Ali Langdon on channel whatever she was on, saying pull your head into Craig Kelly. Their tentacles, the paths are into government. Suddenly everyone formed around these hubs. And that's because these hubs had a high reputation score. Because nodes have reputation scores. Who do you trust? Which friends do you trust when they say, oh, look, the government's coming, there's going to be a bank run, you better get some money out of the bank? I've got people who say that to me and I go, oh, don't worry about it. But there's some people, if they, I say, oh, I better go and get 20 grand out of the bank. So nodes have different trust scores, and I think we, on Team Sanity, insufficiently built structures in society where people had strong enough networks to rely upon. In the absence to government. They all trusted government. And a strange thing is happening now, I think. We had these people, mainly unvaccinated people, who got smashed and traumatized. But what we've got to remember is those people now have the upper hand. I mean, when your heart flutters, I've got people who say, oh, I don't know, is it one of those Pfizer events? And, I'm just feeling very blessed that most of the people I know, when our hearts flutter, we go, oh, maybe I walked up those stairs too quick. And now there's articles coming out, why didn't the unvaccinated warn us, and so on and so on. Sanity, whether it's vaccine or other issues, are starting to rise, and you see that in halls of power, like in the US now, elevating Dr. Seema Malhotra and Jay Bhattacharya and RFK Jr. and so on around Trump. But had we established those networks of trust, those high reputation nodes, then it would have given the mainstream Australian and world somewhere to go. And so I think about community in terms of building networks. I think about nodes often cluster, and you have clusters like you do of galaxies, and then you have intermediaries that shuttle information and resources and opinions in between. I think about the way the government tries to control those clusters, and everything we've done with Discernible, and now I'm setting up farms all up and down the east coast of Australia, about one a month at the moment. Yeah, anywhere from, ours is probably the largest I've seen, which is 50 families, community-owned farm, and it's literally a brother and a sister who bought 5 acres up in Taree. The other week I was up there. That runway in Taree, do you know how corrupt that is? Just an aside, bit of pilot talk. 1.5 kilometres, sealed, massively wide, no traffic. You know why it was built? Mark Vaile, Deputy PM, wanted to fly in and out of Taree. Sorry, I'm a bit annoyed at the corruption in this place.
Was he a member of the Chairman's Lounge?
Probably. Anyway, so these communities that I'm trying to create, I'm not just doing it for the feels, because we all need community, which is a valid and true thing, right back to Aristotle, thinks it's core to who we are. But I believe in the scientific approach of we need to think about the networks. Then if we could map humanity into a network map, I think about information distribution, decentralized information distribution amongst lots of nodes, thinking about blockchain and so on, applying that to human relationships and community. Problem of misinformation. I've got a builder at my place the other day telling me that if I get pulled over in traffic, if I say just the right words to the Victoria Police Highway Patrol, he'll be forced to say, "Sorry, sir," and let me go. Not true. Try it. But at the same time, I like the fact that he's not just going, "Well, you're not allowed to do that because you're not allowed." He's actually trying to think for himself. But the problem is he doesn't have any trusted networks to go to get good information. So you have this balancing act between completely decentralized information with data verification, which can be a problem. But then you've got the problem of centralized information, which we have with the science and Fauci and Greg Hunt and whatever, where if it wasn't said by Ali Langdon or by ScoMo, then you were a conspiracy theorist. So I'm trying to figure out how centralized networks, communities, built on short paths in between nodes, building clusters, but at the same time being able to verify information across those networks. That is a real challenge. So I'm doing it in farming. I've tried to do it in media. It does not pay well, which is why I'm in my garage. But I've had Jay Bhattacharya in my garage, which is ridiculous. So I think we need to work on creating those structures. And that's why last year at this event in the other place, Sydney, I spoke on please tell stories. I think what we're missing is how do we engage with the bulk of humanity? Most of them don't have time to come to this conference. That's why you're the 10% or the 1%. They engage with Kyle and Jackie O. It's shocking, isn't it? But they do. And they engage with the Tyson-Jake Paul fight on last night.
What happened? Oh my gosh, what happened? Did Mike Tyson get knocked out?
No.
Is he still alive?
Yeah. Technical win to Jake Paul. Unanimous decision by the judges.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
He landed more Tyson.
But they both won because of the money.
Of course.
Yeah, I think Tyson won in the end because he's now trying to fight his younger brother, Logan Paul. Anyway, people engage with influencers online. There's across platforms, there's about 200,000 people on our lists and our social medias. You can go on and see some girl with some bikini and she's got 900,000 followers and says nothing. So, but if she says, "I don't know about Trump, he's a menace. If you believe in love, you should vote for the woman,
Kamala,
the one who shall not be named." For joy. And what do? They follow. So my point being, what are you going to do? Write them all off as idiots? Well, maybe mainstream is idiots, but the control of politicians flows with the mainstream. We saw that. As soon as lockdowns in Victoria were untenable, as soon as the civil disobedience, suddenly Brett Sutton has advised me that the lockdown's no longer necessary, blah, blah, blah. So, point being, I think we need to engage with these people. And to that end, I love learning about Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals. Does anyone know who that is? Okay. It's a site called Beautiful Trouble. It's the modern version of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which is a book that Obama credits to teaching him how to organize communities. Probably the most divisive president in history. Informs the entire AOC, woke left type of strategy. But they are brilliant strategies. We need to have doing it and understand that the key, maybe you don't want to copy some of the evil strategies, but understand that they are reaching people that we are not. So it's insufficient to have these amazing people that I respect. Yesterday, you heard from them all day. It's insufficient to just have them talk to us and that's it. How I package that up and distribute it through this network map I'm imagining to build communities where they have someone else to rely upon, they have someone else to point to, they have someone else to cite. So what I would implore you all to do in closing would be to engage and build reputation scores, not just around you, but around those clusters. Give people somewhere to go. Frame your message in a way that's digestible. Learn to tell stories. Understand why Drag Time Story Hour was so big. You know the strategy behind that, right? Very quickly, that was not Story Hour. It's called the real action is in your enemy's reaction. They put on the Drag Time Story Hour. You do nothing, they win. They got their drag time. But they will keep escalating quite deliberately. Read Rules for Radicals. Quite deliberately until you react, until the Christians of this world come out and do protests. And then they'll say, bigot, transphobe. What they're doing is they're trying to get a reaction out of the normal people. I don't know why I brought that up. Brilliant techniques. You've got to understand that there's another technique. Your target, freeze your target, cut them off, personalize that story for the masses, and then polarize based on that. This is another Alinsky method. They do this all the time in our mainstream media. And we sit back and we say, oh, that's terrible, the world's going to hell. How about we get engaged? So what I employ you to do is do things like, I've identified food supply, farming, something I can do. I'm creating farms. I'm specialising there. Hoodie's going around and doing what he's doing. What are you doing in your little network? Because if we can build these structures, I think we'll be more resilient. Don't doubt it. It's not just vaccines. It's a war between control and freedom is what I believe it is. It's the elite versus the people.
Very much so. Look, thank you, Matt. There's so much to unpack here, and I do want to have questions from the audience, but I'll just pick up on a couple of themes. So one of the things that struck me, both in what Graham was saying and what Matt was saying, is this notion that when we take action, and my husband and I were talking about this the other day at dinner, when we take action, I think in Team Sanity, let's say, we have an implicit notion of what the goal is. And I mean, in my mind, I always tell this story, I was traveling in the back seat of the car with my mom, and my mom, who was a psychologist and used to come out with these ridiculous questions at completely inappropriate times, she said, oh, so Gigi, what do you think the point of life is? And I was just in the back seat, and I said, well, to make other people happy, obviously, right? And I have learned over the 30 years to 40 years to expand that to be myself as well, include myself as well, but that notion of, oh, well, obviously that's what we're going for, right? Obviously. I don't say that very much, and we certainly don't say it in economics, right? And this is one of the problems, actually, that we have now in science, is that the principle-based, objective-based, kind of almost ideological of our actions. Why are we doing what we're doing? The why question is no longer made explicit in a lot of classrooms, in a lot of education of students. I mean, it is in Academia Libera Mentis. Remember that applications are closing the 20th of November for the boot camp. But that's not really obvious, whereas when you're talking about these rules, it seems like if I try to ask myself, what are you going for when you want to get a reaction out of somebody, when you want there to be division? You're not going for maximum happiness. You're not going for elevating people's quality of life. You're not going for increasing love and connection and quality of relationship. You're going for destruction. That's right. And that is not okay. That is not something that people can get behind. And certainly from an economic standpoint, you're burning resources. Why do you want to do that? Whenever you burn resources, you're not having good that you could have, right? And so I think maybe one thing that we could try to do more, and I'm trying to do this more when I'm speaking, is make it explicit why we do what we do. Right? We're not doing this in division and foment discord. We are doing it to bring people together, to re-emphasize that even though we have very specific laws and scientific techniques and technical tools now that we didn't have 50 or 100 years ago, the reality is that none of that is worth anything unless we know why we're using those tools to try to do things in the world. And that purpose has got to be more oriented towards love and connection and prosperity for people than discord and just attention seeking and everything else. And I do feel when people don't feel that love when they're young, they act out in ways that are destructive when they're older, and they convince themselves that somehow that's enough. That will make them happy, and it doesn't. So anyway.
This is the tension that I mentioned earlier, though. Do you go and educate people into that? Or do you just get the job done? So an example with Discernible, it's a nice, warm, I just sit there and ask nice questions. Surprised that whole COVID period, I was trying to incite. People don't realise that. I would have some Professor Catherine Bennett on, the Dan Andrews paraded around, whatever. I'd have these people on, and I'd be very polite, and I'd try and ask them questions, let them burn themselves. Yep. Or I would say, let's support the government in this and this, whilst trying to inflame civil disobedience. Because I felt that, why am I going to educate people into a libertarian philosophy? Yeah. No, I'm just going to try and get them to start disobeying lockdowns. And it works. So why do you...
I don't know. I mean, I am such a kind of, I suppose, radical libertarian at heart. I just don't want to control anybody. I think that's just wrong morally. I think everyone has the right to develop themselves and figure out what they believe, and it can be completely different from what I believe, and that's fine, that's great, because then we've got more diversity to draw upon when we have a crisis, because diversity is where you get new ideas from, right, when you have a crisis. Like, that's where innovation comes from, that's where all growth comes from an economic standpoint. It's new ideas. That diversity, and if I control, I'm blocking human progress. That's my philosophy, right? And so I really struggle to try to take any action that would manipulate somebody, or somehow, I'm just such a I don't even see manipulation when it's happening because I'm so not oriented towards it, right? Which is a weakness, actually. I don't know if you have this problem. I have this problem. I see when people are trying to manipulate me.
So, not suggesting we manipulate, but let's say, for example, with the misinfo bill, or with any of the things that you want to wake people up to, do you go out and take the American line and say they're after your freedoms? Because that's true.
I do.
Or do you go out, and I would suggest this, lean towards that the government is allowed to say whatever they want because they have an exception carved out in the bill. That's not fair. You Australians, you should be able to say stuff just like the Albo's allowed to say.
Because fairness is an Australian thing.
Yeah, and I think I'd rather be in America. But I understand where I am, and I'm appealing to the sense of fairness. So I'm being strategic. I'm not manipulating.
Yep.
One of the big questions that has arisen out of what happened in Port Hedland, that initiative there, which is really gaining some serious traction. I was challenged by somebody in the media as to why I think that was going to bring about change and why anyone should take any notice of it. It was quite offensive, and I stopped him in his tracks because I said to him, if there was a slight chance that you thought that somebody might be trying to manipulate your DNA or your immune system, would you like to know about that? And his initial response was, no, I wouldn't. And I said, what? If you heard a noise in your garage and somebody might be setting fire to your house, would you want to know about that? Well, of course I would. I said, so let me ask you the question again. If you thought someone was interfering with your DNA, would you like to know about it? He said, yeah, well, of course I would. I said, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Doctor, I'm not a scientist, but I have a feeling that something is happening that is having the hair stand up on the back of my neck, and I want to live a life of peace. So I want to uncover, is that happening or not? Because I don't want to worry about something that's not happening. I'm not going to waste my energy. We waste our energy on too many things. Too many people in hating Dan Andrews. He has control of your life. People only drive you crazy if you give them the keys. There's no profit in hatred.
That's a great phrase.
There's no profit in hatred. So we've got to make our question, we've got to question rather than tell. I think you get people to tell their story. And that's what I did with this guy, and eventually turned around. One of the councillors in Port Hedland was dead against what was going to go on, but by the time that meeting was over, he voted for it and has become an exponent of it now. So this is how I believe we bring about change. We need to ask questions. That's the basic foundation of good mentoring. Come up with their own answers by asking them targeted questions. And we've got to do it in a way by, I love the model of ASF. Like there's an authority gradient which is almost flat. In the airline industry, we talk about authority gradient. In the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, there are a lot of crashes that happened because of the hierarchical system where the co-pilot would rather die than tell the captain that he made a mistake.
Jeez.
Right? Because there was a steep gradient from the captain to the co-pilot. When I flew, I always created an environment where there was a level gradient. Everyone knew I was the captain. I had an extra stripe. Everyone knew that the buck stopped with me. But everybody. So I created a team environment around the only silly question is the one you don't ask, and we're going to work together.
Yep.
And I got involved in a raft exercise once, an emergency exercise. 2 rafts in the water with about 60 people divided between 2 rafts. Commander in one, but the scenario was we just ditched an aeroplane, and we were literally in the water. We had our uniforms on, and people were role playing, and we got into the rafts, and they assessed the 2 different rafts and how they worked out. There was no script given to the raft commanders. We just had to do it based on it. I got into the raft, and I'm looking at all these people looking at me like, "You're the mongrel who just put the aeroplane in the water," and I had to assert an authority for a start, just to give someone a focal point. And I said in a very loud voice, "My name's Graham Hood. I'm now the raft commander. I was the captain of the aircraft. We've got a message out. We expect to be rescued at some time very soon. Don't worry. And I am the raft commander, and this person is my co-raft commander, and everything comes to me through him." And they're all looking like, and they're all getting panicky, and they're all wet, and some people are crying and everything. And then I thought, what am I going to do now? Decided to start with you on my right, and I looked at the guy on my right in the raft. It was a circular raft, and I said, "Hi, Matt, my name's Graham Hood. I'm the raft commander," and you introduced yourself back to me. And I said, "Right now, Matt, I want you to introduce yourself to the person on your right and go right round the circle." And when I then said, "Right, every one of you is now responsible for that person on your right. If they're in trouble, you need to work with them, and if you can't resolve it, then you come to me." And what happened was the whole raft functioned well because everyone had a focus. Everyone took responsibility for their neighbour next to them. Transpose that into a global community where if every one of us, out of other-centred love, just focused on our neighbour, and that's what Jesus said, there's only really 2 commandments: love the Creator with everything you got and love your neighbour as you love yourself. If we only just focused on that, would we need government? Military? Would we need police? Would we need judiciary? We all look after each other, and that's why a level gradient's really, really important. And government doesn't get that because it's rule and policy based. And some of the greatest demonic forces involved in the mandates were the HR departments of corporations. Everything's policy. It didn't matter whether, you could have been there with your arm severed and bleeding to death. "Oh no, we can't do anything about that because it's not in the policy manual." Policy doesn't have a heart. But anyhow, I have so
many stories from the university hierarchy and HR. I'm sure Nick does as well about this. So just one final thing I wanted to mention before we open to the floor. One of my main focuses or foci in the last year or 2 has been, how do we get the young people back together? How do we get people from 18 to 30-ish to, first of all, get together again as a community, be with each other as young people should. Secondly, relationships with the opposite sex and have family formation and see fertility and settling down as a positive route to happiness, because the family at the end of the day is the foundation of the communities that we were talking about. So I don't want to get you guys to say something about that now because I want to open to the floor, but it is something that I'm very focused on, and I've wanted there to be kind of a aspect of ASF, but nobody's championed it, so sort of wait. So I've had to create this academia thing because that's what I do, right? And we are bringing together people 18 to 30 together in northern New South Wales in December, and of course at the Belgium Castle as well. But I think something more broadly like that, or at some point, ASF or otherwise, would be very valuable to these young people who don't really yet understand that that's a really important thing to invest in. And even here, look around the room. How many people here are under 30? Okay, one person. Alex is. Oh yeah, right. Mike Sladden and Alex, yeah. So, it's really sad, makes me sad that's, well, some of us have asked our children, would you like to come? And they're like, "Oh, I have to do something, whatever, fine. We all have things to do too, right? But we managed to come here because we realize it's important." You want to say something brief about this before
Very, very brief. I just want to say, if we want to look at how we got to this point, we've got to look at what's been cancelled in the last 20 or 30 years. It was taken out of our society is the reason why the society is collapsing. Some tapestry threads have been taken out of the tapestry. God's been cancelled, men have been cancelled, marriage has been cancelled, you name it. There's so many, free speech, your right to bodily autonomy, all those things that have been cancelled are the reason why we're in this space.
I agree. Okay, so opening to the floor, we have a roving mic, perhaps. Yes, thank you very much, Nick. And we have 3 questions so far. We'll start at the back and then come forward to Rafe and then go there and then over there.
I wonder what's happened to the art of contemplative thinking with the younger generations. My work's broken up into 2 areas. It's suicide prevention and working with alleged violent men in family violence situations. Now, some of them are violent, some aren't. And I spent a lot of time working with them, with being disconnected. And then I came across a few weeks ago Harvard's research, 84-year project on happiness. And they put happiness down to whether you're connected or disconnected. And then it has the flow-on effect. It has a very positive effect emotionally, mentally and physically. I'm doing this work unknowing of Harvard's, and I didn't invent it, it's been around for ages, with my clients. And one of the things I spend a lot of time with them is actually inner self-reflection from a non-judgmental position themselves and the art of contemplation and actually making up their own minds. And this is where the sociology comes in from C. Wright Mills. The influence, an undue and unfair influence of the power elites in society. And it's almost, with some of you can see the light turn on, and the question is, why didn't they teach us this at school? And I said, well, in my days, a baby boomer, they did.
What's your name? Sorry? Greg, really, can I just say something briefly on that?
Sure.
The one thing I found that's really prominent in most men, and in the recovery movement we see it, no, I'm a failure. I'm always going to be a failure. My life's a mess. There's no way I can turn it. When I say to them, no, hang on a minute, hang on, you're a work in progress. We've got to see ourselves as a work in progress. You're not doomed to be a constant failure and be a waste of space in society. There's a chance to rise above that. And I'm living proof of that myself, because I would have been one of the people that you would have been talking to.
At the age of 41.
Yeah.
And I did a 2-3 day live-in weekend personal development, self-awareness type thing. That was 4 weeks apart. And the light went on. It was the last 6th day for most of us when we realised what was holding us back. And it was that sense of not being connected, not being loved, wanted, part of, and all the rest of it. Now, I came through, as I've said earlier, forensic work with the federal government for about 19 years in fraud investigation. And then I was in the dealership for a while, and I had the hair down here and all the rest of it, no tattoos. And then after I did that, those 3-day weekends, I thought, right, I'm going to uni, I'm going to do a social work degree. Didn't know why, had no idea. So I went through, I did a double major degree, I've got a major in sociology, through the hospital system, and saw how corrupt that was and everything else, and I thought, bugger it, I've got to get out on my own. And so I worked myself, and I'm a trained neuropsychotherapist now, and I'm actually on the board of the International Association of Applied Neuroscience. So this stuff here really fits in well for what I'm doing. But the major thing is people doubt themselves, and quite often, no good, you can't do it. They take it on board and believe it. Then I get them to actually think. And one bloke said to me last year, he goes, why didn't my psychiatrist tell me this over the last 9 years? And I said, well, it's not easy to remit.
But the self-acceptance component of, so my mother was a psychologist and she worked mostly with women, but there was an awful lot of kind of low esteem and sort of anxiety because of not feeling worthy, right? And you see this in men now as well, and particularly exacerbated by the lack of connection and lack of respect that men have. And the thing is that, men are gorgeous, women are gorgeous, right? We have these incredible, so much capacity in there, and people forget to tell that to each other on a daily basis. And even men who use porn and are, just they feel ashamed. There's a reason why you're drawn to that. You're drawn to want to connect with women. There's nothing wrong with that. That partnership has been one of the foundations of civilization, right? Nature is not the root of the problem, right? The problem is the context and the way you've been thinking about things, right? The framing of things. I just want to come on to some other people, but we can talk at tea. Rafe?
Three points, very briefly, but I don't like to stand on my own voice.
on love. Make a note to find out more about a psychologist called Ian D. Suttie, the great anti-Freud. Freud said it's all about sex, Suttie says it's all about love. Now, he didn't live to fight the battle. He died at 1935. He didn't get the chance to he's so important. It was the taboo on tenderness, which is really strong in males of older generations. Right, second point, championing dating in our group. I have to say that my second wife died 12 months ago, so I'm dating again. I'll just mention that. What's been cancelled in my lifetime is the weekly community dance, where the young people come together and sit around a big room and they take turns dancing with someone, and in principle you can date with talk closely, 10, 15 or 20 other people.
So the community dance, absolutely fabulous. And why don't you organize that, Rafe? The problem is, the thing is, the venues cost so much, right? And we know this, Nick and I know this, right? Finding a venue that can actually house a dance is so hard today. Like, it used to be the barn, right? The barn in a local, I think, is the venue. If we could get a venue.
The problem is getting people to go. I'm not going to that.
Oh, come on. You got a farmhouse, don't you? You got farms. Please? We would go. I would go. I would love to dance.
18-year-olds are not going to go to that.
Oh, they are. They want to meet other people their age. Decide. Somewhere. Pick somebody. Yeah, pick somebody. Yep. They do if you want to champion the dating thing, let's talk. I mean, I'm not available, but you know.
During that crazy COVID period, I often had this experience of talking to sometimes a stranger, sometimes someone I knew, but I just didn't know where they stood. And you're just having a normal conversation, and I was kind of sounding them out a little bit. What do you think about all this COVID stuff that's been happening? And often it would happen that I would realise, they see it the same way as me. They think it's all crazy, and it would be this enormously, a kindred spirit. This is amazing. I feel like there should be a German word for that. I don't know, the opposite of.
Yeah, it's not Zeitgeist or
yeah.
Schadenfreude.
But yeah, I'm really curious what you all think about what it was was there any common threads that connected the people through the lies, the falseness of what we were being told. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. Was it, yeah, I'm keen to hear your thoughts. What was it that connected people that were able to see through it?
I don't think it matters. It matters because I've spent so many years talking to legends like this. I'm seeing faces around the room that stood up and we did these crazy things. Great. It doesn't move the world. It doesn't move policy. Politicians know this. You've got to go after that middle, and if you can move that middle. And so why don't we spend less time trying to figure out more of us, and why don't we figure out, if you look at history, right, things like the Great Man of History theory and these sorts of theories about how history is made, you think everyone was noble in Alexander the Great's time, or everyone was noble in the Enlightenment period, or when Charlotte Mason was walking around. I know you got a bunch of homeschoolers here. You think everyone was like that? No. In history, about those 10%. You're reading about these sorts of people who will read about one day there's this crazy airline captain who quit his job and did all this stuff 50 years ago, and look what's come out of it. They're not going to talk about the sleeping masses. So I think we need to focus more on realizing we need to move that mass will get stuff done. You may be in the history books in the future, but why are we trying to turn them into us? Why are we trying to... I think that's a failing goal.
I think for me, what I noticed was that we all gravitate to someone we can resonate with. Happening, but the fact is that I just lost my train of thought. We all want to feel like we belong to like-minded groups. It's that herd mentality. But I agree with Matt. It's not about shifting other people into our way, allowing them to think for themselves. And one thing I've often said, right wing, left wing, who cares? I never flew an aeroplane that flew well with one or the other missing. And where do all the people sit? In between the two, in the fuselage. That's where all the seats are. And that's where the majority of people live, in between right wing and left. We've got to bring down the division. Division creates fear, and fear creates control. And if we bring down the division and allow people to think for themselves, and when people can identify method as an indicator of motive, for example, the COVID mandates were brought about fear and bribery. Now, most people, if they think about it, would imagine that if anyone is bribing, coercing, or bullying you into doing something, you can automatically guess that that's not in your best interest. But when people do something out of love, when their moral standard is love, it's not always right, but it's a better motive than coercion and control. And I proved this accidentally at one meeting I was at with about 400 people. I was asked in Q&A at the end, why are you doing this? Why are you spending all your what are you in this for? And I said, money. We know that. And it was never the motive in the first place. I was earning $350,000 a year as a Qantas captain. You know, I didn't give that up because I'm going to make a lot of money out of social media. And it's not for ego, because the one thing I learned years ago was that ego was my worst enemy. The worst enemy of any doctor, of any lawyer.
Or any scientist.
Any scientist is ego. So I had an ego warning light that flashed every time I was doing something to support my ego, and I was with other people who were too. So it's not ego. So what is it? And I looked at the people and I said, I think I know what it is. I do love my country. And it's not the ground mass, the land mass that sits between two oceans. It's the people. So I'm doing this because I love you. And I look them straight in the eye and I say, I'm doing this because I love you. And I think that's all there is. A lot of people would look at the ground. And when they look up again, their faces are wet because they're not used to hearing it. They're not used to feeling it. And when we show them love, when we can stand with somebody who disagrees with us and love them, if I can go up to Dan Andrews, you think this is what I would say.
No, exactly.
This is what I would say. I would say to Dan Andrews, your behaviour has been reprehensible. What you've done will go down in history as one of the most horrific things done in this state. I'm so glad I don't live in your frame. You know what? The last thing you need to do is to be condemned. You need to be held to account, but you need loving because you haven't demonstrated it and you don't know what it is. And I'm just here to tell you I love you enough to hold you to account because you're not going to get better as a human being. What's better for our society? To have pedophiles healed, in jail with ankle bracelets on and all that? Are we better off healing them and getting them back into society? Are we better off getting narcissists and psychopaths into a place where they can be healed and be better contributors to society? It's a much better outcome. But we don't do that when we hate. And when we hate, we give Andrews, he's got control of our lives. And we're giving him what he cherished most, control
Attention.
over us.
Yep, totally agree. Magnus has a mic.
So just two things that occupy my thoughts here. We in this room think we're in a group called the Freedom People. Maybe we think we're special because we're being proved right. Get up into a helicopter. One metaphor that helps me is over time, looking at our culture, there's a thing called perinatal matrices, development of a child. Stage 1 is in the womb, oceanic bliss, the longest. The womb turns slightly toxic. The child will go, what the hell's going on? Stage 3 is called death, when the head's engaged, where we are as a culture. But what's forgotten and missed is stage 4, and it's life after birth. We're not special because we're in this group. I don't know why this whole thing came about, and my intuition said there's no way I'm believing this, and started to fight hard. We're not special. The other thing I'll say is many people in this of the butterfly from the caterpillar, 12% of the cells become the butterfly. The rest is nutritive soup for the butterfly. Now, we are not the butterfly chrysalis coming into form, and we are not special, but you can't help everybody. And many people in this very rapidly transition with AI is going to go even faster. We just don't forget it. We're not right, and we can't help everybody, and find the ones who have the spark and light in them and work with them and love the others until they die or whatever. I don't care. But that's the things I just wanted to add.
Yeah, that's good.
Live and let live.
Just three quick ones, and probably more towards Graham. And please don't take them sort of as an offence or in a way. Just another thing to think about. Just in terms of the fatherhood thing, there's a great book called Fatherless America by David Blackhorn, where he talks about single motherhood. But he also focuses on this issue that the men. There's one story where there was a young black man who grew up and said he never met his father, hardly ever saw his father. But his family was intact and he worked 3 jobs and they're in poverty. And he knew in a form of providing for him. So protection, provision and procreation as being 3 P's of manhood and masculinity. The issue was that his mother was at home. And with the economics currently, the issue of banking, which I think was a fundamental thing of how people responded also to the COVID thing, where it's only a recent phenomenon that the families are split where even lower class, working class people, both parents have to work and put the children into care by the state very early on. The whole system economically is, whether they're buying BMWs or not, that's a situation where the mother is separated from the children as well, so which is a significant thing. The father being separated is a significant factor, but I think that story that Blankenhorn tells is quite significant. The knowledge that the father is the provider and is doing significant for the child and not going off the rails. So I thought that was quite significant. That was one thing. And the second thing was in regard to pornography. It's a concept that's not well known, I don't think, mentioning Saul Alinsky and all the revolutionaries, etc., going back a long way, is that the pornography, the sexual movement can be construed as a form of political control. And when you start to see that through that lens, and when young men recognize that, and they only recognize it now that they're trapped, they're enslaved by this, that this was purposeful. And this was part of the core of the revolutionaries from William Reich all the way back, even the French Revolution. It's interesting that it's not just, this was orchestrated as a system of control. The last thing I would say was, in terms of religion, I think in the notion that we have humility and gratitude, the patrimony that the churches have given so that you can even have the concept of Jesus being the second person of the Trinity was a battle that was fought for 1,500 years at least to the Reformation. Even the Bible itself was a patrimony that was given with a battle against heresies that were relentless from Arianism on. And they've provided this to sort of say, right, well, I've figured it out myself, is kind of lacks a sense of context of history, etc. Although they have failed and need to be taken into account, many of them, the very concepts in which we think have been provided to us by those that we kind of So 3 things, but sorry for there's too many things. But it was a great talk, and so many things were touched upon. But there's just those 3 things that I think are less acknowledged than they should be, I think.
Yeah, well, all these things end up being distorted from wonderful ideas because psychopaths and narcissists come in and seek to control it, which is where the biggest problems are. But I agree with everything that you're saying. I completely agree with it.
So my question's for Matt, probably, but everyone...
I don't talk to journalists.
Oh, that's a lie. Matt interviewed me on his podcast. Language appropriation is what I wanted to talk about. You're saying we should tell stories, but I've noticed the language of unity, inclusion, building, rebuilding has been appropriated by the people who are doing the division. So when we use those words, their connotation actually the reframe that the people doing all the division and the tearing down are doing. So how would you recommend we tell stories? Like someone in the education workshop yesterday suggested that we don't use the language that's been reappropriated, but we forge out, new terms. What language are you using to tell stories?
Yeah, so you know the famous quote, "I don't care who writes the nation's laws, let me write its songs." Mm-hmm. That's what I'm really saying. I'm not suggesting we get down and dirty and do what AOC does and whatever. What I'm suggesting is that every time I go to speak different, and this venue when I get together with all of us experts and eggheads and legends. I like you guys. You're awesome. But we tend to get into this, why don't they get it? And if we can just get the data in front of them, they'll get it and we'll turn the community. No. And so I'm always at pains to say, hey, I use an example. This is not a real conversation, but gee, I love what you're saying, but please, can you make it relevant? Can you use some language that makes it real for the everyday? There's a reason why Ben Fordham is getting more airtime about the misinformation bill, and he's been all over the shop over the last 5-10 years on stuff, because he speaks, Ben Fordham from 2GB, these people, they know how to speak to our people. And I would argue, even people like Jesus, parable, story, meeting people where they're at. Yeah. And so I'm not saying let's be like the radical left, and I'm not saying let's put down our facts and only go on emotion and rhetoric and forget dialectic. No, is that we need to take the brilliance that's in the ASF organisation and always have a part of our brain that says, now, how does the mum in One Turner relate to this? And I think that's why we've had a bit of success with Discernible, because I think about the mum in One Turner, about freedom heroes like this, or data scientists like this, or crazy woke left over there. I think about the mum in One Turner. And I just hope that the gold that's in these sorts of conferences and groups doesn't end here. Mm-hmm. I want to see it in the everyday.
That's exactly why we have this panel right now. And I just language issue a little bit as well, because I mean, one of the things I've noticed in this time in the last few years, first of all, there's a lot of projection of language. So people use accusations towards others when really what they're talking about is themselves. People call me a granny killer. Well, lockdowns killed grannies, right? And that happened over and over and over, right? People calling you something or saying, oh, this is what's happening. What they are doing is that, right? That's that they're describing their problems, right? And the problems they're making. And so there's this kind of warping of language, and then there's the kind of raping of language when you use a term that has been completely dissociated from the meaning that most people think that it has. You create a Tower of Babel. So the way that you're suggesting talking, I think, is really recognize the way that people use language in their everyday lives, in reality, and then conform to that in a sense, right? Because you can't dictate your own language, right? You can't define language. Nobody owns language. This is why the whole notion of, these are my pronouns is completely ridiculous, because, you are going to be called by what people perceive you to be, right? You will be called a he. That is just how, because people are going to see a he. So it's going to be he, and that's part of being in the human race, is that you are part of all of us, and our perceptions determine what our language then, is expressing. And so you're saying basically listen to the people on the streets language.
Well, yeah, to address what language do I use, Rebecca? Well, if someone calls me a granny killer because I wasn't wearing a mask, this happened in whatever the suburb was, Ringwood, I can say, well, don't you know that masks don't work? Have you seen the thing where he blows the vape through the thing? Jay Bhattacharya says this and all this. That doesn't reach them. They think I'm a granny killer. So my goal in that moment is to get them to think I love them, right? So I'll find a way to say, I'm not interested in proving them wrong. I'm interested in saying, I just came from my granny. She's actually really sick right now. Mm-hmm. I'm not making up lies.
Made her sick. You made her sick because you went.
You made her sick.
my point is, I'm trying to get them on an emotional engagement, not lies. What I use is to say, actually, my grandmother died 5 years ago, whatever. I'm not at war with them. I'm trying to meet with them and disarm them. So the language I use is more emotional than factual.
But it's also meeting their principle, right? That you're saying, I share that principle. So in other words,
they value emotion above facts.
Well, they also apparently value grandmother. Saying, yes, I recognize that grandmothers are valuable. Yeah.
I think we've got to be careful not to get in the ring with people. It's not about getting into the ring and sparring with them. Nobody wins. Everybody gets bruised when we do that. And getting back to something you said that really made me cringe when you said, freedom heroes like this.
Sorry.
Look, really, because the greatest enemy of the freedom movement is the freedom movement. Mm-hmm. It is its own greatest enemy. Totally. I have withdrawn from the freedom movement. I was labelled as this freedom fighter, I didn't. You ask 300 different people what their version of freedom is, different answers, and they'll all be correct. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. But at the end of the day, we need to resist what we feel we need to resist based on good, logical risk-benefit analysis. And that's all I did when I came up. And my wife got me to do that. She said when she heard me call let me know when there's a Pfizer clinic at the airport. I'll get jabbed then, but I'm not getting AstraZeneca. She said, are you going to get jabbed? I said, yeah. She said, have you done any risk-benefit analysis? No, well, the government's done all that. She said, would you let the government do the safety inspection on your airplane? I said, no. She said, well, what are you doing? And that's when I realised I had forsaken my own ability to do proper risk-benefit analysis. And as a result of that, I was about to go down the path with everybody else, because we get so busy and we think, oh, they've worried about that. I don't have to worry about that. I'll just get on with life. So I tend to think we need to be more to do risk-benefit analysis in a way. And the reason people like me stand out in certain areas is because it's easy to look like an eagle when you're surrounded by turkeys. And
We got to have a book of these quips. I'll tell you what.
The freedom movement turns on its so many agendas and egos, and you can't control it. It's an insatiable fire, and we need to withdraw from it. And you know, Michelle said to me one day, "Oh, you're an extraordinary person." No, I'm ordinary, and you're ordinary, and that's how we're all meant to be. Behaviour is meant to be ordinary. But
but I think people need a purpose, and I think one of the things they lost during COVID was that purpose. A lot of people just lost their motivation to get up in the morning, and when they find a community that seems to share their goals of, we don't like the lockdowns and stuff, they feel so energized, internalize this, and they start to identify with this notion, oh yes, I'm fighting for freedom, and it becomes their whole point and purpose in life, and that's kind of a natural human thing. And so, I mean, my feeling, my struggle with ASF sometimes is we want to be a culture of tolerance and compassion and science and promoting autonomy, all that stuff. But you need to keep open to everybody, and you need to let people have their say. And sometimes people talk too long and they talk about random stuff. And okay, but it's part of humanity, and that's what we are collectively. And we grow together by being tolerant and just maybe you don't give as much airtime to some of the people for other people, but you still give them voice, and you still say, yes, you're human, and you have as much acceptance for that person as you do for somebody who is just head down, bum up, working for something positive in the back room, right? We are actually at 10:30, I'm sorry. So I think we should probably break, and we will have some more communication over tea and coffee. Thank you very much, everybody.
For further information on ASF, go to scienceandfreedom.org.